The scream hit my phone so violently I thought someone was being murdered. "Noah, they're calling the cops. Strangers are in your house," my brother shrieked. I froze, not from fear, but from recognition. I knew exactly what he'd done. He'd used the emergency key to move himself and his girlfriend into a home I sold weeks ago, a home he still believed belonged to the family. I didn't stand. I didn't panic. I just took a slow drink and watched the sun melt over the plaza. Because my family hadn't just crossed a boundary, they detonated something they didn't understand. And the moment the police arrived, everything shifted in a way none of us could take back. When people ask where I'm from, I usually say Seattle, but that's only half true. I didn't grow up in a city. I grew up inside a system, one engineered long before I was born. My parents, Roger and Elaine, ran our household like a small, tightly controlled corporation. There were roles, hierarchies, expectations, and unspoken rules you learned the hard way. My younger brother Ethan was the visionary, the golden investment. I was the infrastructure, quiet, sturdy, dependable, expected to keep everything running without making noise. If Ethan was the prodigy, I was the proof that you could survive on scraps. Even as a kid, I wasn't treated like a son so much as an asset with predictable output. I wasn't encouraged to dream. I was expected to perform. My earliest memory of this dynamic wasn't dramatic. It was a rainy Tuesday. I was 9. Ethan had broken the neighbor's window playing backyard baseball. He sobbed, terrified. I stepped forward and told the neighbor I'd done it. It wasn't courage. It was training. When my parents came home and heard the story, they didn't correct the lie. They didn't defend me. They rewarded me. Roger patted my shoulder like I was a loyal employee. "Good man, Noah." Taking responsibility builds character. But it hadn't built character. It built a pattern that followed me through every stage of my life. By the time I hit high school, the difference between me and Ethan wasn't subtle. It was institutionalized. On Ethan's 16th birthday, they gave him a nearly new sports sedan with a giant bow on top, the kind you see in holiday commercials. I watched him rev the engine, watched the neighbors applaud, watched my parents beam like they had just minted a prince. On my 16th birthday, a booklet of bus routes and a speech about financial independence. "Cars make kids lazy," Roger said. "You'll thank us one day." I didn't thank them, and they didn't notice. Ethan coasted through school with private tutors, summer enrichment programs, and workshops my parents threw money at like confetti. They paid for everything: rent, meals, travel, tuition, all in the name of supporting his potential. For me, they supported my potential too, just in a different way. They said struggle made people stronger. They said hardship builds resilience. They said responsibility defines a man. And so I worked. First at a grocery store, then at a warehouse, then juggling 2 jobs while taking a full load of classes in college. I slept 4 hours a night, drank terrible coffee, and taught myself to function under exhaustion so deep it felt like a second skin. And when I graduated early, with honors, my parents didn't celebrate. They admired the efficiency. "Noah's so low maintenance," my mom told relatives. "He handles everything himself." Translation: he doesn't cost us anything. But the person who actually saw me, really saw me, was my grandfather, Walter. Walter wasn't dramatic. He didn't give speeches or interfere in family politics. He simply paid attention. He'd sit beside me on the porch, offering me quiet space to breathe. He'd slip me a few dollars just to treat myself, even though he was on a fixed income. And when I told him about my first real job offer, an entry-level UX role, he smiled with a pride so genuine it felt like sunlight. "You're building something for yourself, kid," he told me. "Don't let anyone turn your work into their safety net." At the time, I didn't understand the warning. But I remembered it. Years later, it would become the sentence that saved me. As my career took off, the family dynamic sharpened instead of fading. My salary grew. My skills grew. My responsibilities grew, but the way my parents saw me never evolved. To them, I was still infrastructure. So whenever Ethan crashed his car, guess who was expected to help pay the deductible? When he dropped out of college for the second time, guess who took on freelance gigs to help cover his rent? When my parents had unexpected expenses, guess who they called first? Before even asking each other. It wasn't malicious, at least not intentionally. It was habitual entitlement. They depended on me the way people depend on electricity. Completely, thoughtlessly. Until the lights go out. My career as a UX researcher made it impossible not to view my family analytically. I spent my days studying behavior patterns, identifying motivations, designing systems. So one night, while staring at a spreadsheet of my own expenses, I applied the same lens to my life. And the truth snapped into focus. I wasn't part of a family. I was part of a dependency loop. Ethan's failures weren't accidents. They were supported. My parents' irresponsibility wasn't a flaw. It was a strategy. And my loyalty wasn't noble. It was exploited. The more competent I became, the more incompetent they allowed themselves to be. They leaned into helplessness because they knew I would catch the weight before it hit the ground. Walter would have recognized it instantly. But he had passed away the previous winter. And with him went the only person who treated me like more than a tool. The day he died, my parents didn't ask how I was doing. They asked whether I could handle arranging the funeral logistics. Of course, I said, because that was my role. But after his funeral, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. A quiet recognition that the architecture I had lived inside wasn't built with my consent. It was built on my back. So, when the Lisbon job offer landed in my inbox, an opportunity to lead a global team, a promotion that would change my entire trajectory, it should have felt like a celebration. Instead, my first thought was, who's going to handle everything when I'm gone? Who will solve their problems? Who will cover their emergencies? That reaction terrified me. It showed me exactly how deep the hooks went. The truth was brutal but simple. My family wasn't stable because I was there. My family was stable because I kept them there. If I left, they wouldn't grow. They would collapse. And for the first time in my life, I let myself ask, is that my responsibility? The guilt surged like a tidal wave. But beneath it, buried under decades of conditioning, was something else. A spark. A flicker. The first hint of rebellion. The realization that I didn't owe them the structure of my life, because they had never once tried to build theirs. And that's when I understood Walter's warning completely. Sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to walk away from it. If part 2 was the history, part 3 was the pressure, slow, tightening, and deliberate. The kind you don't notice until you can't breathe. My parents didn't demand things loudly. They demanded them quietly, constantly, and with an elegance that made refusal feel immoral. It started with little favors. When Ethan's latest job ended because he didn't vibe with management, my mother called me during my lunch break. "Sweetheart," she sighed, weaponizing exhaustion. "Your brother's rent is due in 2 days. His landlord is being unreasonable. Could you help just until he gets settled?" Just until. 2 words that eventually cost me thousands. Then came the emergencies. The time my dad accidentally missed a tax payment and asked me to wire over a few thousand to prevent penalties. When I suggested he set up automatic payments, he brushed me off. "Noah, don't lecture me. Just handle it." Handle it. My unofficial job title. And then there were the family obligations. Birthdays. Holidays. Random midweek dinners where the bill was always slid my direction with a smile that pretended to be gratitude. Roger would chuckle afterward. You're the successful one. Son, it's tradition. Tradition. In our house. Meant carrying weight no one else bothered to lift. But the turning point came quietly exactly the way all their manipulations did. It was a Sunday. Overcast. Seattle at its most predictable. I was at my condo reviewing a product roadmap when my father called. His voice dripping with practiced worry. Ethan's had a rough month. He started. Your mother and I were thinking it might help him to get out of that old apartment. You have the space. Noah. He could stay in your guest room for a few months. I stared at the windowsill while he spoke, watching rain crawl down the glass like it was racing my patience. Dad. I work from home. I need the space. Oh. Come on. You won't even notice him. I would. I always noticed Ethan because cleaning up after him became second nature. I said no. And for the first time, I heard the shift in my father's voice. Disappointment sharpened into accusation. I didn't realize you'd become so selfish. Selfish. The word hit harder than I wanted to admit. That was the first string pulled. After that, the expectations escalated. Can you cover Ethan's car repairs? He's behind on his phone bill. He needs groceries. He needs a loan. He needs. Each request came wrapped in guilt. You won't let your brother starve. Will you? You know he's sensitive. You know he's not as strong as you. Translation. Your strength is our safety net. His weakness is your responsibility. At work, I was leading UX teams, presenting insights, building structures that made complex systems functional. At home, I was expected to be a single function tool. But the tightening didn't stop at money. It spread into my time, my identity, my autonomy. My mom started showing up at my condo unannounced. She had a key for emergencies, but began using it whenever she felt like talking. I'd come home to find her folding my laundry, rearranging my fridge, or sitting on my couch with a cup of tea. This place is too big for you alone, she'd say. Feels like a waste. A waste. My sanctuary. My hard-earned peace. Reduced to a family asset in their mental ledger. When I mentioned the possibility of travel for work, my parents exchanged looks like I had suggested abandoning a newborn. What about Ethan? My mom asked. What about family events? My dad added. Who will be here if something happens? There it was again. That subtle but unmistakable message. Your life is not your own. You exist to support ours. The Lisbon job offer should have been a lifeline. But instead it triggered a new wave of pressure. When I casually mentioned it over dinner, my mom's fork froze midair. Portugal. For how long? A year? Maybe more. My dad shook his head. Actually laughed. You're not serious. I am. Noah. My mom said slowly. Like explaining basic math to a child. You can't just leave. Your brother needs you. We need you. There was no question in her tone. No consideration of my goals, career, or happiness. Just the assumption that their needs outweighed my life. That was the second string. The one I felt tightening around my throat. But the third string, the one that crossed a moral line, came a week later. I discovered Ethan had used my credit card. Not stolen it. Used it. Because the number had autofilled from a past purchase and he didn't think it was a big deal. The charge a last-minute weekend trip to Vegas. When I confronted my parents, expecting outrage, they responded with, well, he must have needed a break. Noah, don't be dramatic. You can afford it. Something broke in that moment. Not loudly, not violently, but decisively. It wasn't just boundary crossing anymore. It was boundary erasure. They didn't see lines. They saw access. They didn't see me. They saw utility. And the guilt they had engineered for decades wrapped around me like rope. pulling tighter every time I tried to step back. But what none of them realized was this. Every rope has a breaking point. And mine was coming fast. Because Lisbon wasn't just a job. It was the first door that opened outward instead of inward. And I was already reaching for the handle. The breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with a smile. It was my last weekend in Seattle before the Lisbon move. My flight was already booked. My bags were half packed. I had spent weeks quietly preparing my exit, selling my house, closing accounts, moving the last pieces of my life into a version that was finally mine. And then my parents invited me to one last family dinner. A harmless gesture. A normal Sunday. That's how betrayal always disguises itself wrapped in routine. Their house smelled like it always did: citrus cleaner and overcooked pot roast. Ethan was already at the table, scrolling his phone, doing that thing where he pretended to be bored so someone else would entertain him. We sat down. Plates clattered. My mother poured wine. And halfway through the meal, my dad cleared his throat with a kind of ceremonial weight. "So," he said, looking at me with forced casualness, "your brother has been having a rough time lately." I didn't respond. I already knew where this was going. I just didn't know how far. My mom reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Sweetheart, since you're leaving your condo empty for a while." I stiffened. We thought it made sense for Ethan to stay there, just until he gets his momentum back. I set my fork down. "Mom, Dad, I told you I need that space untouched. I work from there when I'm home. And I already made arrangements." My dad cut me off with a bright, almost cheerful wave of his hand. "Yes. Yes. The property management story. We know. But we talked it through." And honestly, he leaned back, smiling with the relaxed confidence of someone announcing the solution to a simple puzzle. "We've decided it's better for the family if Ethan lives there. And we've already helped him move some things in." The room went silent. I felt something inside me slip quietly, like a gear coming off its axis. "You did what I asked." My mom's voice softened, dripping with the same syrupy logic I'd grown up swallowing. "Noah, it's just space. You barely use it. Ethan needs stability. You're being rigid about something that shouldn't matter." Shouldn't matter. My home, my earned stability, my paid-for sanctuary. "Ethan," I said slowly, "did you put your things in my condo?" He shrugged, not even looking up. "Yeah. Mom and Dad said it was fine." There it was. The line. Crossed not casually, but deliberately. My parents exchanged a look, unified in their confidence that this was inevitable, natural, the way the family ecosystem should function. My needs were optional. Ethan's needs were gospel. My dad spread his hands. "Noah, this isn't about ownership. It's about responsibility. Your brother needs a place. And you're in a position to help. It's time you stop thinking only of yourself." Only of myself? The words detonated in my chest. 32 years of swallowing their logic suddenly reversed direction. 32 years of programmed guilt snapped like a dry twig. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt vacant. A clean, terrifying emptiness where obligation used to live. I stood up slowly. "No," I said, and the word felt like oxygen. My father frowned. "No. No." I repeated. "You don't get to decide what happens to my home. You don't get to volunteer my life for me." My mother's expression hardened. "You're overreacting." "No," I said again. "You're overreaching." Ethan scoffed. "Dude, chill." I turned to him, and he finally lifted his eyes from his phone when he heard something new in my voice. Finality. This ends now. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was a verdict. The table erupted, voices arguing, guilt flying, accusations hitting like hail, But none of it landed. The rope that had held me for decades had finally snapped. I walked out of the house without looking back. The night air cold against my skin. They thought they had manipulated me into a corner. They had no idea they had just pushed me into an exit. And the next morning, when I learned what they'd actually done, that they hadn't just moved Ethan's things into my condo, but had given him the emergency key, the decision wasn't emotional anymore. It was inevitable. When I woke up the next morning, the Seattle sky was its usual washed-out gray. But something in me felt sharper, cleaner, like frost forming along the edge of a blade. I checked my phone's 7 missed calls. For voicemails. 2 long texts from my mother. And 1 photo message from Ethan, showing him sprawled on my living room couch like he was posing for a rental brochure. I didn't respond. I didn't react. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up my real estate agent's email chain, and reread the confirmation. Sale complete. Funds cleared. Ownership transferred. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't dramatic. It was legal fact. My condo wasn't family property. It wasn't shared space. It belonged to the Coopers. And the Coopers alone. That was when the calm hit me, not relief. Not triumph. Precision. The kind I used at work when something complicated snapped into clarity. My family had built an entire system around the assumption that I would always absorb the fallout. They depended on my instincts fix, stabilize, protect. So this time, I did the one thing they never prepared for. I opted out. Quietly. Methodically. One controlled step at a time. The first thing I did was print every document tied to the sale deed transfer. Final inspection. Time-stamped handoff of keys. I scanned them into a single PDF and sent them to the Coopers. Subject, for your records. Please contact me immediately if there's an issue. 15 minutes later, Ryan Cooper called. His voice tight. There's an issue. By the time he described what happened, Ethan screaming. His girlfriend claiming squatters' rights. My parents acting like they had executive authority over property they didn't own. My hands weren't shaking. My focus was surgical. Ryan, I said calmly. Put me on speaker. I'll handle everything. Quiet revenge doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. It needs distance. It needs the confidence of someone who finally sees the entire system from above. The police arrived 5 minutes later. I provided the deed, the sale date, my confirmation, and my written permission for the Coopers to pursue charges if Ethan refused to leave. And just like that, the first pillar of the old architecture cracked. My family no longer had access. They no longer had the ability to rewrite rules mid-game. They no longer had ownership over a life that wasn't theirs. They had lost the resource. The next step was cutting off the supply. I sat down with a cup of black coffee and opened my banking app. Every automatic payment I'd quietly made for years, Ethan's overdraft fees, my parents' unexpected bills, the family phone plan I still paid for even though everyone pretended it was a mystery, was canceled. One by one, I wrote it all out in a clean, unemotional email. Effective immediately. All financial support and access to my accounts has been revoked. If you need assistance, please contact your own service providers. Do not contact me for money again. No signature. No apology. Just policy. Then came the hardest part. Not emotionally. Logistically. Drafting the final severance email. I opened a blank document and structured it the way I would any major offboarding communication at work. Clear expectations. Definitive boundaries. Non-negotiable terms. Subject: moving forward. Do not enter my home under any circumstances. Do not use my name, my property, or my resources without explicit written permission. Do not involve me in Ethan's finances, housing, or emergencies. All keys, digital or physical, are now invalid. Any violation will result in legal escalation. It wasn't revenge. It was governance. The kind I should have established years ago. I hovered over the send button, expecting panic, expecting guilt, but none came. Just a widening sense of gravity. A shift. A transfer of power I didn't fully feel until I clicked send and watched the screen confirm delivery. That was when another message arrived. From someone who never demanded anything from me. Someone who saw me, even when no one else did. My grandfather's old friend. Mrs. Halpern, who had known Walter for 30 years, had heard from a neighbor that I was leaving for Portugal. She asked to meet for coffee before I left. We sat in her cluttered sunroom, the air warm and filled with the faint smell of old books. I heard things have been difficult, she said. Not prying, not pushing. They've always been difficult. I replied quietly. I just finally stopped mistaking it for normal. She nodded slowly, thoughtfully. That's what growing up really is. Noah. Recognizing the difference between responsibility and servitude. I didn't expect the ache in my chest. She reached out, touched my wrist gently. Walter would be proud of you. 6 words. And suddenly, I felt something shift inside me. The guilt wasn't gone, but it was dissolving, like fog thinning in sunlight. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just reclaimed my life. I had rewritten my role in it. From infrastructure to individual, from default provider to autonomous man, from someone who reacted to someone who decided, and as I walked away from her porch into the cool evening air, one truth settled into me with undeniable clarity. Quiet revenge isn't loud. It's not angry. It's the sound of a door closing behind you and staying closed. The confrontation didn't happen in a living room or at a dinner table. It happened in a place built entirely on movement, the departures terminal at SeaTac Airport. 3 weeks after the police evicted Ethan from the Cooper's home, I finally flew back to Seattle for one last round of paperwork before relocating permanently to Lisbon. I tried to keep it quiet. But news travels fast in a family addicted to access. They found out. Of course they did. My plane landed on a fog-soaked afternoon. I collected my single carry-on, everything else was already shipped overseas, and headed toward the curb where my rideshare was waiting. But I didn't make it to the exit. I spotted them before they spotted me. My parents, Roger and Elaine, standing stiffly by the baggage claim carousel, flanking Ethan like bodyguards. They didn't look upset. They looked prepared. A tribunal waiting for the defendant. I could have turned around, pretended not to see them, kept walking, but running had never been the point. This was the moment the system was designed to prevent me choosing myself over them. So I walked straight up to them. My father stepped forward first, eyes sharp, jaw tight. Noah, we need to talk. My mother crossed her arms. We're not letting you leave the country like this. Ethan stayed slightly behind them, hands in pockets, staring at the floor like a kid dragged to apologize for something he didn't regret. I looked at them, really looked. The exhaustion, the anger, the panic. Not because they were losing me, but because they were losing control. What is it you think I owe you? I asked calmly. My mother exhaled through her nose, offended by my tone. You owe this family an explanation. You humiliated us. You embarrassed your brother. You made enemies out of people we need. People we need? Not people they wronged. Roger jabbed a finger toward my chest. Ryan Cooper is pulling every contract he has with us. Do you understand what that means? 15 years of business gone? And you didn't lift a damn finger to stop it. There was nothing to stop. I said, Ethan committed a crime. He made a mistake. My dad spat. And you made it worse. There it was. The truth they'd been orbiting, but could never admit. They still believed my purpose was to absorb fallout they created. My mother's voice softened the tone she used when manipulation was plan B. Noah. Honey, Ethan needs help. He's been struggling. He's depressed. He's lost his job again. He's confused about his future. You're his big brother. You're supposed to guide him. I kept my face still. I'm not his compass. I said. I'm not anyone's safety net. My mother's expression cracked into disbelief. How can you say that we are your family? Family doesn't mean servitude. Her eyes watered, not grief, not sadness. Offense. Ethan finally looked up. You could have just told us what you were planning. He muttered. You didn't have to blindside everyone. I didn't blindside you. I said. I built a life. I told you I needed boundaries. And every one of you ignored that. He scoffed under his breath. You're such a martyr. A slow rush of heat crept into my chest, not anger. Not even resentment. Clarity. Do you understand what you did? I asked him. You broke into someone's home. You lied. You dragged mom and dad into a mess they weren't prepared for. And the moment consequences arrived, you hid behind them like a child. I was told I could be there, he snapped. That's when the last piece clicked for me. He really believed that. Because they had raised him to. Before I could respond, a voice cut through the tension behind us. Noah. I turned. Ryan Cooper stood there, coat slung over one arm. Suitcase rolling behind him. A folder tucked under his hand. His expression was a mix of surprise and something sterner. My parents stiffened like they'd been jolted with electricity. Ryan. My father said. Voice suddenly bright and friendly. Like he hadn't spent 2 weeks trash-talking the man in private. We're so glad to run into you. We've been trying to. Ryan held up a hand, stopping him cold. Mr. Sullivan, I'm not here to talk to you. He turned to me. Noah, do you have a minute? The air shifted, a second power balance tilting visibly. I nodded. Of course. We stepped a few feet away. Close enough that my family could still hear, but far enough that they were excluded. Ryan took out the folder. I brought copies of the police report and the notarized statements from the responding officers. I wanted to give them to you personally. My mother blanched. You filed a police report against our son. Ryan didn't even look at her. Your son forced entry into my home. He said plainly. Your family denied the sale existed. And your son refused to leave until law enforcement arrived. Yes, I filed a report. Ethan's face flushed red. That's exaggerated. No, Ryan said, turning cold. That's generous. My father stepped forward. Ryan, please. We've been partners for years. We can fix this. Noah acted emotionally. This has nothing to do with Noah. Ryan cut in. He turned to me. I respect how you handled everything. Quiet. Professional. Direct. I wish more people were that clear. That sentence stunned my parents. Ryan paused, choosing his next words carefully. Noah, I know your situation with your family has been complicated. If you want my firm's legal department to support you with restraining orders, asset protections, or boundary enforcement, we're prepared to help. I blinked. Why would you do that? Because you did everything right? He said simply. And they did everything wrong. Behind me, my mother's voice cracked. This is insane. He's our son. And yet, Ryan said calmly, you treat him like property. Silence dropped over the terminal. My father's shoulders slumped. His voice suddenly raw. Noah, we need you. If we lose Pinnacle, the firm collapses. I didn't speak. Because for the first time, they weren't demanding. They were begging. Noah, please. My mother whispered. Help us. My voice, when it came, was even, grounded. I'm not saving you. I said quietly. Not again. Not ever. You're abandoning your family. My dad choked. No. I corrected. I'm enforcing a boundary. There's a difference. My mother reached forward. grabbing my wrist with cold fingers. "You can't walk away from us." I gently removed her hand. "I already did." They stared at me, not in anger this time, but in disbelief, in recognition. Their system, the one they spent decades building, was collapsing. Not because I destroyed it, but because I stepped out of it. I turned to Ryan, shook his hand, thanked him, and headed for the exit. Behind me, I heard my father whisper, voice breaking, "What do we do now?" And for the first time in my life, the answer wasn't mine to give. I walked through the sliding airport doors and into the cool, open air, feeling something I had never felt so fully before. Unattached, unclaimed, unafraid. The life waiting for me wasn't built on obligation. It was built on choice. And I chose myself. 6 months later, Lisbon feels less like a new chapter and more like the first chapter I ever wrote for myself. My family's silence hasn't echoed, it's evaporated. No late-night crisis calls. No guilt-soaked voicemails. No demands dressed as emergencies. Just quiet. A quiet I didn't know was possible. Through professional circles, I eventually heard what happened back home. Pinnacle didn't just pull their account. They shared in careful corporate language why. And in a city like Seattle, where business reputations travel faster than gossip, the dominoes fell exactly as expected. Rogers' firm downsized. Contracts froze. Bonuses disappeared. And the emergency fund they always swore they didn't have gone. Without my money. Without my steady hand propping up their lives. Reality finally made its way to their doorstep. And for the first time in his life, Ethan got a job that required showing up. A receptionist at a small auto shop. Not glamorous. Not impressive. But real. He's paying his own bills now, late. Imperfectly. But independently. And my parents, they've stopped offering him shortcuts. They can't afford to give them. This isn't schadenfreude. It's proof. The vacuum of competence worked exactly as it was always meant to work. When you remove the person who does everything, everyone else learns what everything actually requires. As for me, my rebirth isn't dramatic. It's quiet, steady, foundational. Mornings in Alfama, sipping espresso while the city wakes up beneath terracotta rooftops. Evenings walking along the waterfront, letting the Atlantic breeze wipe the remnants of my old life off my skin. Weekends spent exploring places I never thought I'd see, because I was too busy carrying people who never learned to walk. I'm alone. Yes. But solitude isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of freedom. And for the first time, freedom fits me perfectly. If this story resonated with you, even in a small, quiet way, take a moment to honor that. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. If you felt seen, understood, or simply less alone, feel free to like this video and join our community by subscribing. We share stories for the people who carry everyone else. The ones who deserve space to finally breathe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and whether you've ever walked away to save yourself. Your voice matters here. This story is fictional and created for entertainment only. It isn't legal, financial, or psychological advice. Real-life conflicts should be handled with qualified professionals. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.